On my sister's wedding day, I stood in the crowd like a fool. The same crowd I had paid for with every dollar of my savings. My mother smiled at her perfect daughter, while pretending I didn't exist. But when my sister turned toward me, her fake smile vanished. And the next thing I remember is the cold marble floor against my back and hundreds of phones recording my fall. That day, they thought they broke me. But they had no idea what I was about to do next. Hi, my name is Rachel Carter, and I'm 28 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, with my husband, Daniel Brooks. To the outside world, our life looks simple and perfect. A small house with white shutters, a maple tree by the porch, and evenings that smell like coffee and peace. Sometimes, I sit by the living room window, watching the soft glow of the streetlights and thinking how lucky I am to have a man like Daniel beside me. He's the kind of husband who remembers how I take my tea, who still kisses my forehead before leaving for work, who never lets a day end without saying, "I love you." But even with all this peace, there are nights when silence feels heavy, because some wounds don't stop aching, no matter how much time has passed. My mother, Karen Mitchell, and my younger sister, Amber, are the reasons behind those wounds. Growing up, I was the forgotten child, the one who worked quietly in the background while Amber was the sunshine of the family. Mom adored her. Every birthday, every achievement, every family photo, Amber was at the center, smiling brightly, while I was somewhere in the corner, holding the cake knife or fixing someone's hair. I used to think maybe if I worked harder, if I stayed quiet, if I made Mom proud, she'd notice me too. But attention in our house wasn't earned, it was inherited. And I wasn't lucky enough to be born as the favorite. Dad was the only one who made me feel seen. He'd come home late from work, ruffle my hair, and whisper, "You're my smart girl, Rachel." But when I was 15, he passed away from a heart attack, and with him went the only bit of warmth that made our house feel like home. After that, everything changed. Mom grew colder, Amber grew bolder, and I became invisible. I left home at 18, put myself through college, worked 2 jobs, and built a life from nothing. By the time I met Daniel, I had already promised myself that I'd never depend on anyone again, especially not my family. Daniel and I met at a local bookstore in Austin. He was buying a novel he'd already read twice, just because he liked how it smelled. He said, "There's something comforting about old pages. They remind you that stories survive." I remember smiling because in that moment, I felt like maybe I could too. We married 2 years later in a quiet ceremony, just a few friends and co-workers, no family. I had invited Mom and Amber out of courtesy, but they never came. Instead, Mom texted me that morning, "I hope you're not making a mistake." I didn't reply. I deleted the message and told myself I'd moved on. But moving on is easier to say when the phone doesn't ring with the voice that once broke you. Over the years, I tried to forget them. Daniel would often ask, "Do you ever think about calling your mother?" And I'd shake my head. "No point," I'd say. "Some relationships die long before the people do." He'd nod quietly, never pushing further, knowing that the subject carried a weight I wasn't ready to lift. Still, I sometimes wondered what it would be like to hear her voice again, to be called sweetheart without sarcasm. The thought alone made my heart ache. I missed something that never really existed, a version of family I had only dreamed of. One Sunday morning, Daniel and I were having breakfast on the patio. The sunlight filtered through the trees, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. He reached for my hand and said, "You know, Rachel, peace looks good on you." I smiled faintly, but inside I felt a strange emptiness. It was like living with a quiet echo of all the love I had given that was never returned. Sometimes, even when life is perfect, the past has a way of whispering, reminding you that not all battles end just because you walked away. That day, as I cleared the plates, my phone buzzed. I looked down and froze. The screen flashed a name I hadn't seen in years, Mom. My chest tightened. For a moment, I just stared, unable to breathe. Daniel looked up from his newspaper and asked, "Everything okay?" I swallowed hard and said, "It's my mother." His expression changed immediately, a mix of concern and warning. "Rachel," he said softly, "you don't have to answer it." But my fingers were already trembling over the screen. Years of silence, pain, and distance stood between us, and yet, a small part of me still wanted to believe just maybe, this time would be different. As I pressed the green button and brought the phone to my ear, my heart pounded. I heard her voice after all these years, soft, almost gentle. "Rachel," she said, "sweetheart, it's Mom." And just like that, the walls I'd built inside me began to crack. I didn't know what she was going to say, but deep down, I could feel something shifting, something that would soon change everything about the life I thought was safe. When I heard her voice after so many years, my throat went dry. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to protect the peace I had built, but another part, a foolish, hopeful part, wanted to hold on. "Hi, Mom," I finally managed, my voice unsteady. There was a pause on the other end, the kind that stretches long enough to remind you of everything unsaid. Then she sighed softly. "It's been so long, Rachel. I've missed you." I didn't know how to respond. The woman who once told me I was ungrateful and unlovable was now saying she missed me. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but years of disappointment don't vanish in a single breath. "I've missed you too," I said quietly, because it was easier than explaining how much she'd hurt me. She began talking, her tone unusually gentle. "Amber's getting married next month. We were thinking, maybe you and Daniel could come. It's been years, sweetheart. I want my girls together again." I froze. Those words, "my girls," hit me like a wave. I couldn't remember the last time she'd included me in that phrase. My eyes stung, and before I could stop myself, I smiled. "That sounds nice, Mom. I'd love to come." She let out a breath of relief. "Good. We'll make things right this time. I promise." After the call ended, I sat there for a moment, holding the phone against my chest. I felt a strange mixture of fear and joy. It was as if the little girl inside me, the one who used to wait for her mother's approval, was suddenly awake again. Daniel walked in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said with a half-smile. I looked up at him, my voice trembling. "She called me. My mom. She wants to see me." The smile faded from his face. "Rachel," he said carefully, "please tell me you're not going to jump into this." I tried to explain, but he shook his head. "You remember what they did to you. You remember the wedding, your graduation, every time they left you out. They haven't changed." "I know," I whispered, staring down at the table. "But what if they have? What if this is their way of fixing things?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You have a heart that forgives too easily, and they know it. Just promise me you'll be careful." I nodded, though deep inside I knew I was already planning the visit. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, watching the ceiling fan spin, thinking about all the memories I had tried to bury. Mom brushing Amber's hair before school while mine stayed tangled, Amber's birthday parties with balloons and gifts while mine went forgotten, Mom's words echoing, "You should be more like your sister." Each memory felt like a tiny scar reopening. But beneath all that pain, there was still a tiny voice whispering, "Maybe this time will be different." The next morning, Daniel made pancakes like he always did on Saturdays. He placed the plate in front of me and said, "If you're really going, I'll drive you there." "I don't trust them." I smiled faintly. "You don't have to, Daniel. I'll be fine." He gave me a look that said he didn't believe me. "You think you're fine because you've learned to hide the hurt. But I see it, Rachel. Every time you talk about them, your hands shake." I glanced down at my fingers resting on the table. They were trembling. 2 days later, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair, trying to calm my nerves. I had chosen a simple beige dress, nothing too formal, nothing too distant. I wanted to look approachable, but not desperate. Daniel stood by the door, watching me with folded arms. "Last chance to back out," he said softly. I shook my head. "If I don't go, I'll always wonder." He sighed, walked over, and kissed my forehead. "Okay," he said. "But if they hurt you again, I swear I won't stay silent this time." As we drove to my mother's house, the city faded behind us and was replaced by long stretches of quiet suburbs. Every turn of the road seemed to pull me back into the past. When we reached her street, my stomach knotted. The house looked different. New paint, a bigger porch, expensive cars in the driveway. It felt like the kind of life Mom always wanted, and the kind I was never part of. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The moment I rang the doorbell, the door swung open. Mom stood there, smiling as if the past had never happened. "Rachel," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that smelled like perfume and nostalgia. For a second, I let myself believe in her warmth. Then Amber appeared behind her, her hair perfect, her expression bright and rehearsed. "Wow, look who's here," she said, her voice sweet but sharp underneath. "Didn't think you'd actually show up." "Hi, Amber," I replied softly. She leaned in and hugged me too, her arms stiff. "Mom's been dying to see you," she said, glancing at Daniel standing by the car. "And that must be your husband. He's taller than I expected." Mom laughed a little too loudly, and everything suddenly felt fake. We all went inside, where the scent of vanilla candles filled the air. The living room looked like something out of a magazine: expensive furniture, polished floors, family photos everywhere. But in every photo, there was something missing: me. As we sat down, Mom poured me tea and smiled. "You look good, sweetheart. Marriage suits you." I thanked her quietly. Then, after a moment, she exchanged a glance with Amber, who bit her lip as if unsure how to begin. Mom cleared her throat. "There's something we wanted to talk to you about." My heart sank. I should have known. "Amber's wedding is next month," Mom continued. "We're running a bit short on money, and you've always been so successful. I was hoping you could help us out." I felt my chest tighten. My mind went blank for a moment, and I stared at her, trying to find the right words. She had called not because she missed me, not because she wanted to fix anything, but because she needed something. "How much?" I asked quietly. Mom smiled faintly, relieved. "Just a little help. Maybe around 80,000. You know, to make sure your sister's special day is perfect." I nodded slowly, forcing a smile. "Of course, Mom. I'll send it in a couple of days." Her eyes lit up, and for the rest of the visit, she was all warmth and kindness again. But inside me, something broke. I realized Daniel had been right all along. They hadn't changed, they had just learned new ways to use me. Still, as I hugged her goodbye, I whispered to myself, "One last chance, Rachel. One last time." 2 days later, I kept my promise. I mailed the check for $80,000, tucked neatly in a cream-colored envelope with my mother's name on it. Daniel didn't speak a word when I slipped it into the postbox. He just watched me with that look, the same one he gives when he's trying to hold back disappointment. That night, over dinner, the silence between us felt heavy. Finally, he said, "You didn't owe them that, Rachel." I looked down at my plate. "I know," I whispered. "But maybe this will finally bring peace." He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Peace doesn't come from buying it. It comes from walking away." I didn't answer. I just smiled faintly, pretending I still believed my family deserved another chance. Deep inside, though, a quiet ache started to grow, the kind that comes when you already know the ending but still hope it will change. Days passed, and no one called. No message, no thank you text, not even a simple acknowledgement that they'd received the money. I tried not to let it bother me, but every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, expecting it to be Mom. It never was. Instead, I'd scroll through social media and see pictures from Amber's wedding planning: flowers, dresses, rehearsal dinners, and smiling faces that didn't include me. Once, I even saw a caption under one of Mom's posts: "Can't wait to see our family together again." The irony cut deep. One evening, Daniel came home to find me sitting at the dining table, scrolling through my phone with tears in my eyes. "Still no word?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "It's been 2 weeks," I said. "Maybe they're just busy." He sighed, sitting beside me. "Busy spending your money, maybe." His tone wasn't cruel, it was tired. "You keep giving people pieces of yourself, and all they do is take until there's nothing left. I just don't want to see you hurt again." I reached for his hand. "I'll be fine," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. It was 3 days before the wedding when Mom finally called again. Her tone was bright, cheerful, as if nothing strange had happened. "Rachel, honey. We've been so busy with preparations. Of course you and Daniel are invited. Bring him along. It'll mean the world to Amber. I hesitated. Are you sure, Mom? I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. She laughed lightly. Nonsense. Your family. Amber will be thrilled to have you there. After we hung up, Daniel looked at me across the room. They finally called? I nodded. She invited us to the wedding. He stared at me for a long moment. Rachel, he said carefully, please don't expect too much. Go for closure, not connection. I nodded again, but inside, I felt a small spark of hope flicker. Maybe this time really would be different. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up early. The sunlight was soft, filtering through the curtains in warm streaks across the floor. Daniel was still asleep beside me, his hand resting over mine. I stared at the ceiling, whispering to myself, this is it, Rachel. Be calm. Be kind. No matter what happens. I got up, chose a pale blue dress, a color Daniel said always made my eyes look hopeful, and curled my hair loosely over my shoulders. When Daniel saw me, he smiled, but there was sadness behind it. You look beautiful, he said. Just promise me if anything feels wrong we leave. I nodded, slipping my hand into his. Promise. The wedding was being held at a luxurious hotel ballroom in downtown Austin. When we arrived, the parking lot was filled with expensive cars, photographers, and floral arrangements so extravagant they almost looked unreal. I felt small as we walked in, like an outsider in a world that had moved on without me. The music, the chatter, the laughter, it all sounded distant. As soon as Mom saw me, she waved from across the room. Her smile looked picture-perfect, but her eyes didn't reach me. Rachel, sweetheart, she exclaimed, air-kissing me on both cheeks. You look lovely. It's so good you could come. I thanked her quietly. Amber approached in her bridal gown, radiant and glowing, every bit the princess Mom had always treated her as. You made it, she said, her tone a mix of surprise and unease. Of course, I replied. Wouldn't miss it. She smiled stiffly. Well, just try not to stand too close to Josh, okay? He's kind of nervous around new people. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her right. New people? I'm your sister, Amber. Her expression hardened just slightly before she masked it again with a laugh. You know what I mean. It's a big day. I just want everything perfect. Daniel's hand tightened around mine. I could feel the tension radiating from him. He whispered, do you want to leave? I shook my head. No, not yet. We found our seats at the far end of the hall, away from the main table. The ceremony was beautiful, almost painfully so. Soft music, tearful vows, applause. Everything seemed perfect except for the cold glances that occasionally darted in my direction. When the dinner began, I noticed that every time I approached Mom or Amber, they would turn to speak to someone else. At one point, I overheard Mom whispering to a guest, that's my elder daughter. She's been away for a while. The tone in her voice made me feel like an embarrassing secret she was trying to downplay. I excused myself and went to the restroom just to breathe. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My lipstick still neat, my smile trembling, my eyes glistening with the effort of pretending everything was fine. When I returned to the hall, Daniel was waiting by the side. You okay? He asked. Fine, I lied. Just a little overwhelmed. He looked at me for a long second and said, you're too graceful for people who don't deserve it. I tried to laugh, but it came out broken. As the night went on, I sat quietly, watching Amber dance with her new husband, Josh Taylor. They looked happy, at least on the surface. Mom clapped proudly from the front row, her eyes never once turning toward me. The irony burned. I had paid for this entire fairy tale, yet I was treated like a stranger in the crowd. Later, when Amber went up on the stage to thank everyone, I decided to do the same. To walk up, congratulate her, and show that I still cared despite everything. Daniel tried to stop me, whispering, Rachel, don't, but I smiled and said, it's okay. It's her day. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Amber turned, her face tightening as I approached. Amber, I said softly, reaching out a hand. Congratulations. Her eyes flashed with anger. What are you doing up here? She hissed under her breath. You're making a scene. I just wanted to wish you well, I replied quietly. She forced a smile for the guests, but her voice dropped to a whisper sharp enough to cut glass. You always ruin everything. And before I could step back, she shoved me, hard. The crowd gasped. I fell, my body hitting the floor as pain shot up my arm. For a moment, everything went silent. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. Then people started murmuring, pulling out their phones. I could hear someone say, "Oh my God, did she push her?" And another voice reply, "I got it on video." Daniel was there within seconds, kneeling beside me. "Rachel, are you okay?" he shouted. I nodded weakly, my face burning with humiliation. He stood up, his voice shaking with anger. "What the hell is wrong with you people?" The entire room went still. Amber stepped back, her expression blank. Mom looked horrified, not because of what had happened, but because guests were watching. "Daniel, please," she stammered. "Don't make a scene." He glared at her. "A scene? Your daughter just pushed my wife off a stage." He helped me up, wrapping his arm protectively around me. I could hear whispers, cameras clicking, guests murmuring. The room felt colder than ever. "We're leaving," Daniel said firmly. I didn't argue. I just leaned into him, holding on as he guided me toward the exit. My knees trembled with every step, my heart breaking with every stare that followed. As we reached the door, I looked back one last time. Mom stood frozen in place, Amber glaring defiantly beside her. The perfect picture of family had finally cracked. I turned away, whispering to myself, never again. When we got home that night, I felt like my body wasn't mine anymore. My knees ached from the fall, my palms were scraped, and my heart felt hollow, echoing with everything I couldn't say in that hole. Daniel helped me inside and guided me to the couch, his hands trembling with anger. He knelt in front of me, checking the bruises on my arm. "Does it hurt?" he asked softly. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Rachel," he whispered, his voice breaking, "they humiliated you in front of everyone. You can't just let this go." Tears welled up, spilling before I could stop them. "I don't understand why," I said, my voice shaking. "I did everything for them. I paid for her wedding, I tried to make peace. Why do they hate me so much?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because kindness threatens people who live on pride. They'll never see your heart because they're too busy protecting their own lies." He stood up, pacing across the living room. "This isn't just cruelty anymore, it's abuse. You have every right to stand up for yourself." I shook my head. "They're my family." He stopped and turned to me sharply. "No, Rachel. Family doesn't push you off a stage and call it love." His words cut deep because I knew he was right. I had spent my entire life mistaking pain for loyalty, humiliation for forgiveness. I thought if I kept giving, one day they'd see my worth. But that night, lying bruised and broken in the house I had built myself, I realized they never would. The next morning, I woke up feeling numb. The bruises on my arm had darkened to a deep purple, a reminder that the hurt wasn't just emotional this time. Daniel was in the kitchen, making coffee, his movements tense and quiet. When he saw me, he placed a mug on the table and said, "You should see a doctor." I nodded, wrapping my hands around the cup just for warmth. "Daniel," I said quietly, "what if I did something about it? Legally?" He didn't even hesitate. "Then I'll be right beside you." That afternoon, we visited a local clinic where the doctor documented my injuries. She looked at me with pity and asked, "How did this happen?" I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Daniel answered for me. "Her sister pushed her, at a wedding." The doctor's eyebrows shot up. "You should report it," she said firmly. "This isn't just a family matter." I nodded silently, feeling my stomach twist. On the drive home, Daniel reached over and took my hand. "You've stayed silent your whole life, Rachel. Maybe it's time you let the world hear your side." That night, I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, watching clips that had already started to circulate online. Guests from the wedding had uploaded videos, short, shaky recordings, but clear enough to see Amber's hands push me. The comments beneath them made my heart race. That's disgusting. Poor woman, she didn't even fight back. I hope she sues them. I felt exposed, like my pain had been put on display for strangers to dissect. But beneath the humiliation, there was a flicker of something else: validation. For once, the world could see what I had endured for years. Daniel found a local attorney named Rebecca Moore, known for handling emotional abuse and assault cases. The next morning, we walked into her office downtown. She was calm, composed, and spoke with the kind of confidence that immediately put me at ease. "Tell me everything," she said. I started from the beginning. My childhood, the favoritism, the years of silence, the phone call, the money, the wedding, the push. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving quickly across the notepad. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "Rachel, you have a strong case. The videos, the witnesses, your medical report. It's all evidence of assault and emotional distress." I swallowed hard. I never wanted to take my family to court. She smiled sadly. "No one ever does. But sometimes justice isn't about revenge, it's about breaking a cycle." Daniel reached over, placing his hand on mine. "We're ready," he said. Rebecca nodded. "Then let's begin." The next few days were a blur of paperwork, statements, and interviews. Mark Lewis, Daniel's longtime friend, who had attended the wedding with his wife, offered to testify. "I saw everything," he said firmly. "It wasn't an accident. Amber shoved her." His words gave me strength I didn't know I had. For the first time, I wasn't just a victim, I was someone fighting back. When Mom found out about the case, she called me in a fury. "How could you do this to your own family?" she shouted. "Amber didn't mean it. You're blowing things out of proportion." I gripped the phone tightly. "You watched her do it, Mom. You stood there while everyone laughed. You didn't even check if I was okay." There was a pause. Then, coldly, she said, "You always were dramatic, Rachel. You just want attention." And with that, she hung up. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking, tears streaming down my face, not because of her words, but because they didn't hurt anymore. I had finally reached the point where her voice no longer had power over me. That night, Daniel sat beside me, his arm wrapped around my shoulders. "You did the right thing," he whispered. "You've carried their cruelty for too long. It's time they face it." I rested my head against him, whispering, "I don't want revenge, Daniel. I just want to stop feeling like the unwanted daughter." He kissed the top of my head. "Then let's make sure they can never make you feel that way again." When I closed my eyes that night, I saw the stage, the crowd, the moment I hit the ground, but instead of shame, I felt resolve. They had pushed me once to make me small. Now I was standing tall enough for them to finally see who I had become. I wasn't the quiet, invisible girl anymore. I was Rachel Carter, and for the first time in my life, I was going to be heard. The following week, Rebecca Moore officially filed the case against my mother, Karen Mitchell, and my sister, Amber Mitchell. The lawsuit stated public humiliation, physical assault, and emotional distress. Seeing my name on the legal documents made my hands tremble. It felt unreal. I had spent my whole life avoiding conflict with them, and now I was dragging our family name into a courtroom. Daniel sat beside me as I signed the last page, his hand steady over mine. "This is your line in the sand, Rachel," he said quietly. "Once you cross it, you never go back." I looked at him and nodded. "I don't want to go back." News of the lawsuit spread faster than I expected. Within days, local blogs in Austin picked it up: "Woman sues mother and sister after wedding incident." People on social media debated it endlessly. Some called me brave, others called me cruel. Strangers had opinions about my pain. But I didn't care. For once, I wasn't hiding. Rebecca handled everything with calm professionalism. "You'll need to stay off social media," she advised. "Don't respond to anything they say. We'll let the evidence speak for itself." And the evidence was strong. The videos clearly showed Amber pushing me. There were multiple witnesses ready to testify. Even the doctor's report and emotional health evaluation supported the case. Still, I couldn't help but feel nervous. I wasn't used to standing in the light. A week before the hearing, Mom showed up at my house unannounced. I opened the door to see her standing there, clutching her purse, eyes sharp as glass. "Can we talk?" she said flatly. Daniel stepped behind me immediately, but I raised a hand. "It's fine," I said softly. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. We stood on the porch, the Texas air thick with heat and tension. "You don't have to do this," she said coldly. "Do what?" I asked. "Destroy your family," she snapped. "Amber is devastated. Do you have any idea what you're putting her through?" My hands shook. "What I'm putting her through?" She pushed me, Mom. In front of hundreds of people. Mom's lip curled. "She made a mistake. You've always exaggerated things, Rachel. Always the victim." Her words hit the same old nerve they always had, but this time, something inside me didn't break, it hardened. "You can leave, Mom," I said quietly. "This conversation is over." Her eyes widened as if she couldn't believe I'd just dismissed her. "You're choosing outsiders over your own blood." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I'm choosing respect over abuse." She left without another word, and when I went back inside, Daniel was waiting. "You okay?" he asked. I took a deep breath. For the first time, yes. The first court date came 2 weeks later. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror wearing a navy blue blouse and a black blazer that Rebecca had suggested. Simple, confident, but not cold, she'd said. As Daniel drove us downtown, my stomach twisted with nerves. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said softly. "I know," I whispered. "But I need to do it." When we walked into the courtroom, I froze for a second. Mom and Amber were already there, sitting together. Amber looked pale but composed, her head held high like she was the victim. Mom avoided my eyes completely. Their lawyer, a middle-aged man in a gray suit, whispered something to them before turning and giving me a brief nod. Rebecca leaned toward me and said, "Don't look at them. Look at me. We tell your story, not theirs." The proceedings began with the usual formalities: introductions, evidence submissions, witness lists. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. When the video from the wedding played on the big screen, a hush fell over the courtroom. There I was, walking toward Amber, smiling nervously. Then the shove. The fall. The gasps. The silence. Even though I'd seen that video dozens of times, watching it here, under the cold light of justice, made it feel heavier. The judge, Judge Anderson, leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "Is this the plaintiff, Ms. Carter?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The defense tried to argue it was an accident, that I had slipped, that Amber hadn't meant any harm. But the video didn't lie, and neither did the witnesses. Mark Lewis was called to the stand. "I saw it clearly," he said. "Amber shoved Rachel. There was no accident." Everyone around me gasped. His voice was calm but firm. The defense attorney tried to trip him up with questions, but Mark didn't falter. "I know what I saw," he repeated. After the witness testimonies, the judge called for a recess. Daniel and I stepped outside into the corridor. "You're doing amazing," he said softly. "I feel like I'm reliving it," I whispered. "Every word, every look. It's all coming back." He held my hand tightly. "That's because you're finally facing it instead of running from it." When the hearing resumed, Rebecca gave her closing statement. Her voice was steady, each word deliberate. "My client, Rachel Carter, has endured years of emotional neglect from her family. What happened at that wedding was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of cruelty, disguised as family dynamics. The world saw a woman get pushed to the ground, but what they didn't see was the lifetime of pain behind that fall. Today, Ms. Carter stands not for revenge, but for dignity." The courtroom was silent when she finished. Judge Anderson glanced through the files, then said calmly, "The court will review all evidence and reconvene for a verdict next week." As we left the courthouse, reporters were waiting outside, microphones and cameras flashing. I felt overwhelmed, frozen under their questions. "Rachel, how do you feel about suing your own family?" one shouted. Another asked, "Do you want them punished or forgiven?" Daniel put his arm around me and guided me toward the car, whispering, "Don't say a word. Let your actions speak." That night, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall. The image of Amber pushing me kept replaying in my mind, not as a memory of pain anymore, but as a symbol of what I'd survived. For the first time, I didn't feel small or invisible. I felt like someone who had finally stopped apologizing for being hurt. I wasn't sure what the verdict would be, but deep down, I already knew that no matter what happened next, I'd finally taken my life back. The day of the final verdict arrived faster than I expected. I barely slept the night before, lying awake and staring at the ceiling, my heart caught somewhere between fear and relief. When Daniel stirred beside me, I whispered, "What if the judge doesn't believe me?" He turned toward me, his voice steady and calm. "He will. Because this time, the truth has proof." I took a deep breath, clutching his hand tightly. For years, I had carried this pain in silence, convinced no one would ever see my side of the story. But now, in just a few hours, everything would be laid bare. Every lie, every humiliation, every bruise on my heart that I tried to hide. When we arrived at the courthouse, the air outside buzzed with tension. Cameras were already there, journalists whispering as they recognized me. I could hear one of them say softly, "That's Rachel Carter." I tried not to look, keeping my focus straight ahead. Rebecca Moore met us at the entrance, her files neatly tucked under her arm. "Are you ready?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. She smiled faintly. "Good. Let's make sure your story ends with justice." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was colder than usual. My mother and Amber were already seated across the aisle. Amber looked fragile for the first time since the incident. Her face pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Mom sat stiff beside her, pretending confidence she no longer had. Their lawyer whispered something, but neither of them looked at me. I wondered if they even recognized the woman sitting across from them anymore. Not the obedient daughter. Not the silent sister. But someone who had finally stopped accepting pain as love. Judge Anderson entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. His presence was calm yet commanding. "Please be seated," he said, adjusting his glasses as he glanced over the files. Rebecca began her final arguments. Her voice was firm but compassionate, carrying the weight of everything I couldn't say. "Your Honor, this case is not just about a single act of violence," she began. "It's about years of emotional abuse that culminated in a public act of humiliation. My client, Rachel Carter, extended kindness, forgiveness, and financial support to her family, even after being neglected and demeaned by them her entire life. What did she receive in return? A shove off a stage and a lifetime of scars. The evidence is clear, the witnesses consistent, and the motive painfully obvious. We're not asking for revenge, Your Honor. We're asking for recognition that no one deserves to be treated this way, not even by their own family." As she spoke, I felt my throat tighten. Her words weren't just legal arguments, they were pieces of my life, laid out for the world to see. The defense attorney stood up next, trying to twist the story into something softer. "Your Honor," he said, "my client, Amber Mitchell, has already expressed regret. This was a misunderstanding during a stressful moment. There was no intention to harm. Miss Carter's fall was unfortunate, but it was an accident, blown out of proportion by the media." Rebecca rose instantly. "An accident doesn't come with anger, Mr. Simmons," she said, her voice sharp. "An accident doesn't come with a shove caught on multiple videos, followed by laughter from the perpetrator. My client didn't slip, she was pushed." The judge nodded slightly. "Proceed," he said. The courtroom fell into silence as he reviewed the exhibits again. The video from the wedding played on the screen once more, echoing through the room. I couldn't bring myself to watch it this time. I stared at the table instead, my fingers gripping the edge. When the sound of my fall filled the room, I heard a few people gasp softly. After several tense minutes, Judge Anderson finally spoke. "I have reviewed the evidence, testimonies, and statements provided by both parties. What I see is not an accident, but a deliberate act of aggression. Furthermore, I see a consistent pattern of emotional manipulation and neglect. He turned his gaze toward my mother and sister. Family is supposed to be a place of safety, not cruelty. This court cannot ignore the emotional and physical harm caused to Ms. Carter. I held my breath as he continued. Therefore, this court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Rachel Carter. The defendant, Amber Mitchell, is hereby sentenced to 100 hours of community service and fined for emotional and physical damages. Additionally, the court orders a formal written and public apology to be issued. Mrs. Karen Mitchell is found guilty of enabling emotional harm and will be required to pay restitution for defamation and psychological distress. For a moment, I couldn't move. My heart pounded in disbelief. Rebecca turned to me with a small, victorious smile. "You did it," she whispered. Daniel squeezed my hand, his eyes glistening with pride. Across the aisle, Amber broke down in quiet sobs. Mom sat motionless, her expression blank. For the first time, the power she'd always held over me was gone. As the courtroom emptied, reporters swarmed outside again, their microphones flashing under the sun. "Rachel, how does it feel to finally get justice?" someone shouted. I paused, looking at the sea of faces. "It feels like breathing after holding your breath for years," I said softly. Daniel guided me toward the car as flashes went off, and for once, I didn't flinch. That evening, Rebecca came by the house to drop off the final paperwork. "This is closure," she said, handing me a folder. "You can move forward now." I thanked her sincerely. "You didn't just help me win a case," I told her. "You helped me find my voice." She smiled. "Then use it. Help someone else someday." After she left, I walked out to the porch, the air cool and still. Daniel joined me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "It's over," he said. "It's really over." I nodded, gazing up at the dark Texas sky. "You know," I said quietly, "for the first time, I'm not scared of the silence anymore." He smiled. "That's because it finally belongs to you." Inside the house, the news was already reporting the verdict. A reporter's voice echoed faintly through the television. "Local woman Rachel Carter wins emotional abuse case against her own family." A powerful message about standing up for dignity. Hearing my name spoken like that didn't feel strange anymore. It felt right. I had spent years trying to be loved by people who saw me as less. Now, I was finally loving myself enough to stop begging for their approval. Later that night, when Daniel went to bed, I sat alone for a moment and looked at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't see the girl who used to cry quietly behind closed doors. I saw a woman who had survived. Justice hadn't erased the past, but it had rewritten the ending. And for me, that was enough. The days after the verdict passed in slow, quiet waves. For the first time in years, my phone stayed silent. Not because I was being ignored, but because the noise that once came from pain was finally gone. I didn't realize how exhausting it was to carry so much emotional weight until it was lifted. Every morning, I woke up a little lighter. The nightmares faded, the guilt stopped clawing at my heart, and the mirror finally reflected someone I could recognize, someone free. Daniel noticed the change before I did. One morning as I poured coffee, he smiled softly and said, "You look peaceful." I paused, realizing he was right. There was no tension in my shoulders, no heaviness in my chest. "Maybe peace comes after the storm," I said, and he nodded. "Or maybe peace is realizing you survived it." In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into something normal again. Daniel went back to work, and I started working remotely on a small financial consulting project. But a part of me still felt like something was missing. Not a person, not forgiveness, but a purpose. After everything that had happened, I didn't just want to move on, I wanted to turn my pain into something meaningful. One afternoon, while scrolling through the news, I came across an article about women who had escaped abusive family environments but had nowhere to go. Their stories mirrored mine: rejection, humiliation, isolation. But unlike me, most didn't have the support of someone like Daniel or a lawyer like Rebecca. That article stirred something inside me. I wanted to create a place for people like them, people who needed not just help, but hope. That night, I shared the idea with Daniel. "I want to start something," I told him. A non-profit, maybe a small foundation that helps women rebuild their lives after family abuse, financial, emotional, any kind. He looked at me, pride gleaming in his eyes. That's the Rachel I fell in love with, he said. The one who turns pain into purpose. I smiled. I'll call it the Phoenix Project. Because it's about rising again, from ashes, from trauma, from everything you thought would destroy you. Setting it up wasn't easy. There were forms, legal registrations, planning, and endless meetings. But every document I signed, every call I made, felt like a step toward healing. Rebecca even offered to help with the legal side of things pro bono. Consider it my contribution, she said when I thanked her. You've already inspired half my clients. A few months later, the Phoenix Project officially opened. A small office in downtown Austin with just 3 staff members and a shared dream. On opening day, a local news reporter, Lily Stone, came to interview me. She had covered my trial months earlier and now wanted to share the story of what came after. She asked, "Rachel, why start this organization?" I took a deep breath before answering. Because when you go through something like that, you realize how lonely it feels. People say, "You'll be okay," but no one tells you how. I wanted to create a place that says, "You don't have to do it alone." The interview went viral. Donations started coming in. Women from across the state reached out with stories that broke my heart and reminded me why I started it all. One message read, "Your story gave me the courage to leave my abusive home. Thank you for showing that it's okay to walk away." I cried reading that, not from sadness, but from a strange, beautiful sense of completion. My pain had finally found its purpose. Life slowly began to bloom again. On weekends, Daniel and I would go hiking near Lake Travis or have late-night movie marathons with pizza and laughter. Sometimes, he'd tease me about becoming Austin's accidental activist, and I'd roll my eyes laughing. But deep down I knew he was proud, and so was I. One evening, Rebecca invited me to speak at a local women's conference. Standing on that stage, looking at hundreds of faces turned toward me, I felt my voice tremble, but not from fear. "I used to believe silence made me strong," I said, my voice echoing across the hall. "That if I just endured, one day they'd love me. But strength isn't about how much you can take, it's about when you finally say, enough." I lost a family, yes. But I found myself. And if I had to choose between the two, I'd choose myself every time. The audience stood and clapped, and I saw tears in more than a few eyes. That night, I realized that healing isn't a destination. It's a journey you walk every single day. Months later, the Phoenix Project had helped over 40 women find housing, therapy, and jobs. Rebecca became one of our board advisors, and Daniel handled our finances part-time. It wasn't just a foundation anymore, it was a community. And through it, I began to understand something I'd never fully grasped before. Forgiveness isn't about letting others back into your life, it's about freeing yourself from the grip of what they did. One Sunday morning, while organizing some donation receipts at the office, I came across the old envelope from Mom, the one that had once held my $80,000 check. I had kept it all this time, not out of attachment, but as a reminder of who I used to be. I held it for a long moment, then smiled and dropped it into the shred bin. The sound of the paper tearing felt like closure. That evening, as Daniel and I sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, he said quietly, "You've changed so much." I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "I finally became who I was supposed to be." He reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. "I'm proud of you." I looked at him and whispered, "I'm proud of me too." As the sun dipped below the horizon, I thought about everything that had happened. The call, the betrayal, the courtroom, the victory, and now this peace. Life had taken me through hell and somehow handed me back something worth living for. I wasn't Rachel the victim anymore. I was Rachel Carter, the woman who rose again. It had been almost a year since the verdict when I heard the doorbell ring that evening. Daniel was in the kitchen making dinner, the faint sound of sizzling filling the house. "I'll get it," I called out. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the front door, expecting a delivery or maybe a volunteer from the foundation. But the moment I saw who stood there, my breath caught in my throat. Amber. She looked nothing like the woman I remembered from the wedding, the one who had worn pride like perfume. Her hair was tied back messily, her face pale and tired. The confidence that used to pour from her every movement was gone. She clutched a small envelope in her trembling hands. "Hi," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The silence between us felt heavy, filled with all the words that could never be unsaid. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my tone calm but distant. She hesitated, glancing down at her shoes. I needed to see you," she said softly. "I just got out." I didn't have to ask what she meant. Her community service and court supervision had finally ended. I nodded slowly. "And what do you want, Amber?" She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I came to apologize," she said, her voice breaking. "Not because the court made me. Because I needed to." I crossed my arms, not out of anger, but protection. "After everything?" She nodded. "I know it's too late. I know sorry doesn't fix what I did. But I've spent every day since that trial thinking about it, thinking about how I became the kind of person who could hurt her own sister." Her voice cracked. "You were always so good to me, Rachel. You helped me when I didn't deserve it. And I repaid you with hate." I wanted to feel anger, but what I felt instead was emptiness. The kind that comes after every emotion has already burned itself out. "Amber," I said quietly, "do you know what hurt the most that night? It wasn't the fall. It wasn't the pain. It was the way you looked at me after. Like I was nothing. Like I didn't even belong in the same room." She started crying, clutching the envelope tighter. "I was jealous," she said through her sobs. "You were everything I wasn't, independent, loved, respected. I thought if I could tear you down, I'd finally matter to Mom. But all I did was destroy myself." Hearing her say that made something inside me shift. For years, I had tried to earn love from people who never knew how to give it. And now, standing on my doorstep, the person who once humiliated me was finally admitting what I'd always known. Her cruelty wasn't power, it was pain. She held out the envelope with shaking hands. "It's from Mom," she said. "She's not well. She wanted me to bring it." I hesitated, staring at the envelope. My stomach tightened. "I don't need anything from her," I said quietly. "Please, just take it." She nodded, lowering her gaze. "I understand." She turned to leave, her shoulders slumped. For a moment, I almost called her back, but then Daniel appeared behind me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "You don't owe her anything, Rachel," he said softly. Amber paused at the gate and looked back one last time. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice trembling, "you were the best sister I could have had. I just wasn't a good enough one to deserve you." And then she walked away. I watched her until she disappeared down the quiet street, her figure fading into the dusk like a ghost from a life I no longer lived. Daniel closed the door slowly, turning to face me. "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, my hands still trembling. "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel satisfaction, or maybe relief. But all I feel is nothing." He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close. "That's peace," he whispered. "It feels strange at first." Later that night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the unopened envelope resting on the table beside me. The sky was streaked with soft orange and purple hues, the air cool and quiet. I turned the envelope over in my hands. The handwriting was familiar. Elegant, controlled, undeniably Mom's. For a long moment, I debated opening it. Then, finally, I did. Inside was a short letter written in her usual neat cursive. "Rachel, I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know that I've thought about everything. Maybe I was too proud to admit it before, but you were always the stronger one. I loved you in my own way, even if I never showed it right. I hope one day you'll understand that mothers make mistakes too, sometimes ones they can never undo. Karen." I read the letter twice. There were no tears, no apologies that could undo the years of pain. But for the first time, I didn't feel that old, aching need to hear her say she loved me. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and whispered into the night, I understand, Mom. But I don't forget. The next morning, I went to the Phoenix Project as usual. When I walked in, the women I worked with greeted me warmly, their smiles genuine and full of light. I realized that this place, these people, was my real family now. One of the younger women, a survivor named Tessa, looked at me and said, "You look peaceful today." I smiled. I am. Later that afternoon, I held a small group session. We sat in a circle, each woman sharing her story of pain and recovery. When it was my turn, I said, "Sometimes the hardest part of healing isn't letting go of the people who hurt you, it's accepting that they may never say sorry. And that's okay. Because peace isn't something they can give you, it's something you decide to claim." The women nodded, some with tears in their eyes. That evening, as Daniel and I drove home, he reached over and took my hand. "You're quiet," he said gently. "Just thinking," I replied. "About her?" "No," I said, looking out at the fading skyline. "About me. About how, for the first time, I don't feel like the girl who was pushed off the stage. I feel like the woman who stood back up." As we pulled into the driveway, I felt a soft calm settle over me. The house glowed warmly in the twilight. I realized that forgiveness didn't have to mean reconciliation. It could simply mean freedom. I turned to Daniel and smiled. "You know," I said softly, "I used to think family was about blood. But now I know, it's about love, respect, and peace. And I finally have that." He squeezed my hand and whispered, "Welcome home." That night before bed, I placed my mother's letter in a drawer, not as a reminder of pain, but as a closed chapter. I whispered to myself, "You can rest now, Rachel. You've made it." And as I drifted to sleep, I realized that this was the real ending. Not the courtroom, not the apology, but the quiet acceptance that I no longer needed either. I had already won. That was my story, one of pain, truth, and finally peace. If my journey touched your heart even a little, I'd love for you to be part of my world. Subscribe to my channel so you never miss another story like this one. And before you go, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? I can't wait to read your answers.